Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and thanks very much for joining us today for the webinar Accelerating Adaptation Finance, Lessons from the Green Climate Fund NAP Readiness Programme. My name is Christian Ledwell, and I'm the Knowledge Manager for the NAP Global Network. I'll be co-moderating today's session with my colleague, Geneva Young.
Hello, everyone. My name is Geneva, and I'm a policy analyst at the NAP Global Network. Thank you for joining us today. So I see people are trickling in. To get us started, here are a few housekeeping points. Today's session will be around 50 minutes long, including a Q&A section at the end. Please feel free to say hello and introduce yourself by typing your name and affiliation in our Zoom chat box. We'd love to get to know you. We will be recording this session in English, and we will be sharing the video as well as the slides with all the participants as a follow-up. Finally, simultaneous translation into French and Spanish is available. You can click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. In the meantime, throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, comments, or technical issues, please just let us know by typing in the chat box.
Today's webinar is brought to you by the NAP Global Network, and in case this is one of your first times joining us for an event, just as a brief introduction, the NAP Global Network was established 10 years ago to enhance national adaptation planning and action in developing countries. We do this through three objective areas: national level action and technical support, South-South peer learning and exchange, and generating, synthesizing, and sharing knowledge like the report we'll be sharing here today.
Today, we have an exciting panel of speakers to share about adaptation financing and the Green Climate Fund NAP Readiness Program. We'll be hearing from two speakers. First up, we'll have Maribel Hernandez. She's a senior policy advisor with the NAP Global Network Secretariat, and she's the lead on adaptation finance. She's also the lead author of our recent publication that analyzes the Green Climate Fund NAP Readiness Program proposals. Next, we'll be hearing from Meyer Siffley, Sustainable Development and Environment Officer at St. Lucia's Department of Sustainable Development. She will be sharing the St. Lucia government's experience in accessing and using the GCF funding for the NAP adaptation planning. So before we dive straight into the presentation, we have prepared a short quiz with 2 questions on the trends we observed in the NAP readiness proposals. So if we can put up the quiz question for the participants. Perfect. So as you should be able to see on your Zoom screen, we have 2 quick questions. The first one is, which of the following outcome areas under the Green Climate Fund NAP Readiness Program received the largest amount of budget allocation? We have 4 options here, and it's a single choice question. A, strengthen adaptation planning governance and institutional coordination. B, produce the evidence basis to design adaptation solutions for maximum impact. C, catalyze private sector engagement in adaptation. And D, increase adaptation finance. So I'll give the participants a couple seconds to choose and enter your response for the first question. Okay, now moving on to the second question. How much total funding has the Green Climate Fund approved under its readiness program for NAP processes and related adaptation planning as of August 31st, 2024? Again, it's a single choice question with 4 options. A is 101 million USD. B is 127 million USD. C is 253 million USD. And D is 349 million USD. Okay, I'll give you a couple more seconds before we end the quiz. And after that, you'll be able to see the responses. Okay, if we could end the quiz now. Perfect. Now you should be able to see the responses and the answers to the quiz questions. The answer to the first one is A, strengthen adaptation planning governance and institutional coordination. And for the second question, the answer is C. The Green Climate Fund has approved 253 million USD for countries through its readiness program for NAP processes as of August 31st, 2024. Thank you for your participation in this quiz.
Thanks, Geneva. And so now Maribel will walk us through these findings in more detail and share a bit more about what they mean. Maribel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christian, and thank you all for attending this webinar. So I'm going to make a brief presentation because we only have 10 minutes of this review of the GCF support program for adaptation planning. So next, please. So the objectives for us were, first of all, to understand how countries have used the initial $3 million available from the GCF for adaptation planning, and then to identify any potential gaps or opportunities to strengthen any specific aspects of adaptation planning within countries, especially now that the GCF has announced that there would be a second sort of NAP window to continue supporting countries' adaptation planning processes. Next, please. So what did we do? We reviewed the content and the budget of all approved proposals for which the information was available on the GCF website as of the 31st of August this year. So we analyzed the content of 108 proposals, and we also went through 84 budgets, which amounted almost 74% of the total approved grants at that time, which, as Geneva has mentioned, was amounted at $253 million. Next. So the first thing we saw is that there was a big momentum for adaptation, that there was a huge progress made since the moment where this GCF Readiness for Adaptation Planning was launched in 2016, with more than 100 countries having accessed funding from the GCF for adaptation planning. So in total, as of the 31st of August this year, there were 113 approved proposals, with more than half of them submitted by least developed countries and small island development states. But as you know, adaptation is an iterative process, and there is still this need to continuing supporting these adaptation planning processes in all countries. Next, please. Also, one important thing is the pivotal role of UN agencies acting as delivery partners. You know that when countries submit readiness proposals to the GCF, they have to go through, they have to use these delivery partners. And for this, in this case, for the readiness proposal for adaptation planning, the UN agencies had a predominant role. But on the other side, what this meant is that national and regional delivery partners were underrepresented. And this is something that I think the GCF is aware of. And in the new strategy, 2025 to 27 strategy, they one of the targets is that having more direct access entities involved in readiness proposal. What we have also seen is that 1/3 of the countries have opted for a phased approach, which means that they haven't submitted only one proposal to tap into the full $3 million available, but they were submitting several proposals, smaller proposals, and that there are still countries that are eligible to this program that haven't submitted their proposals yet. So 53 eligible developing countries that have not yet accessed this GCF support for adaptation planning. Next, please. Now, if we have a look at the GCF readiness outcomes for adaptation planning that you can see here in the slide, what we see is that countries are focusing mostly, are using these funds mostly to achieve or to contribute to achieve to outcomes 1 and 2, with outcome 1, which is the strengthening of adaptation planning, governance, and institutional coordination, is a focus for more than 1/3 of the countries. And on the other side, what we can see is that only a small portion of the funds are dedicated to engaging the private sector. And this is a bit paradoxical because in all NAPs, in all submitted NAPs, what we see is that all countries mention the pivotal role of the private sector on climate change adaptation. So something maybe to push forward and strengthen here. Next, please. Now, if we have a look at how the budgets have been used, something that we notice is that there is an extensive in-country expertise, and that countries are using their own national consultants to implement the activities under these GCF readiness proposals. So local consultants receive nearly twice the budget of international consultants. So international consultants are needed and are there to support, but the bulk of the budget for consultants was allocated to hire national consultants. And there is also, a willingness to keep on strengthening and building capacities at the national level, as we can see here through activities like capacity building, training sessions, workshops, etc., which is very, I think, is on the positive side of things. Next, please. One important focus in our analysis is to look at how countries were moving from the planning phase to the implementation phase. And we noticed that this was the focus for many countries. For instance, 62% of the countries used the grant to develop or strengthen frameworks for the implementation of adaptation priorities. I have put some examples here. For instance, there are countries like Tunisia, Iraq, or Albania that are developing implementation strategies, roadmaps, or work plans. So really strategies or roadmaps, so meaning that they are trying to pave the way towards the implementation structure, the way that they are going to implement their adaptation priorities. Other countries like Ecuador, Guinea, are focusing more, for instance, on mainstreaming adaptation. Mainstreaming in all sectors and at all relevant levels, as you all know, is one of the pillars of the NAP process, the other one being reducing vulnerabilities. So, and mainstreaming adaptation is the first step, is going to increase the chances of these adaptation options of being implemented. And then next, please. And some other examples on how countries are transitioning from planning to implementation using these GCF grants is here. As you can see, 80% of the countries are using the funds to establish monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems. Many other countries are developing project pipeline, drafting concept notes to access GCF resources for project implementation, or developing financing strategies. On the other side, what we see is that very few countries, are mentioning the elaboration of climate change investment plans, which would be providing a structured approach to unlocking and deliver adaptation finance, or conducting pre-feasibility studies or even pilot projects that we all know could be a very good way of testing the impact and the effectiveness of the project, and is the first step towards their replicability and scalability. Next, please. And finally, some key takeaways. So we have called it the opportunities for the way forward. So first of all, we see there an opportunity to continue or to really work a bit more on enhancing private sector engagement. On one side, we have seen before that only 2.6% of the funds has been allocated to activities that will foster private sector engagement in climate change adaptation, and also to explore opportunities to increase the domestic resource mobilization for adaptation. When we had a look at outcome 4, which is enhancing adaptation finance, increasing adaptation finance, we see that most of the countries are focusing now on mobilizing international public climate finance. So private sector finance and domestic finance are some of the aspects that would be good to push forward to strengthen. Also, to continue enhancing country ownership through, continue building capacity, national capacity, continue engaging national consultants, and also, as it is a target to the GCF to use more national entities as delivery partners for the readiness and especially for adaptation planning. Also focus on activities that will help in a very pragmatic manner to transition towards the implementation. And this include the elaboration of climate change adaptation investment plans, for instance. And one lesson or one key takeaway that we think is very important is that when we were looking at all this, we were thinking so this is really creating a huge amount of knowledge. So this is, creating something big. And we thought that it would be very good if governments and delivery partners would share the outputs of this readiness program. Like they shared reports like stakeholder engagement strategies, monitoring frameworks, gender analysis, the knowledge and the outcomes of this to enhance peer learning and avoid duplicating efforts. Because I promise you that there is a huge amount of knowledge that is created through this. And finally, again, in the same line, to build on the experiences that we have acquired through this process to improve the NAP processes in the countries and to ramp up support to countries to transition towards the implementation of their adaptation priorities. Next, please. So this is in a nutshell. You have here the QR if you want to access to this report. And of course, I'm here to, if you have any comments or if you have any questions, happy to answer to them. Thank you, and over to you, Geneva.
Thank you very much for the great presentation and the overview of our key findings, Maribel. We'll now hear from Meyer Siffley on St. Lucia's experience with the Green Climate Fund NAP Readiness Programme. Meyer, take it away.
Thank you so much, Geneva, and thank you for having me. I will be happy to share our experience in St. Lucia so far with GCF adaptation planning. So to start off with, I will start off with our, I am not seeing the slide. Can we go to the second slide, please? All right, so I will start off with the project in the fishery sector, and that is improving the capacity of the fishery sector in St. Lucia to enhance resilience to climate change. Why fisheries is because when we started our NAP process in St. Lucia, we identified 8 priority sectors of which we want to develop the sectoral adaptation strategies and action plans. So far, we have developed 5, and the remaining 8 will be developed under the NAP GCF Readiness project. However, fisheries was one of the first 3 to be developed. So our delivery partner was FAO, and the budget was about $680,000, and it was completed as of 2024 this year. The overall objective was to build technical and institutional capacity of the fishery sector to adapt to the adverse effects of climate change through implementation of the sectoral adaptation plan of the fishery sector, and that is the SASAP, that I just mentioned. And it took on several deliverables, including climate modeling, a feasibility study, gender analysis, stakeholder engagement, ESS, the environment and social safeguards, an economic and financial analysis, an M&E plan, and development of theory of change and log frame. So after this project, in wrapping it up, there was several outcomes that we saw, specifically that there was improvement in their early warning communications and disaster planning. And this was due to the enhanced capacity to capture data and be able to process data. And this is necessary because it really feeds into adaptation solutions in the future. So overall, we saw that adaptation was built in terms of adaptation planning and governance, and also improving internal institutional coordination. And like I said, the baseline data that was captured during this project will really assist in future planning solutions, because fisheries is extremely important to us, not only for the economic value and the livelihoods that it provides, but also to being part of our protein food chain. So next, I will go to last slide, please. Thank you. This is our ongoing project right now. It is the NAP GCF Readiness, and it is enhancing St. Lucia's National Adaptation Plan process through the elaboration of sector strategies and action plans, a strengthened evidence-based and improvement private sector engagement. So this project has quite a few components. Our delivery partner is IISD, and the budget for this is 1.74 million. It started September 2023, and the ultimate project objective is to ensure St. Lucia's NAP process integrates sectoral adaptation plans that are based on strong climate rationale and active stakeholder engagement. So I will do a quick run through for the different components. We have SASAP development, and that is to more or less complete our adaptation plan as it relates to our 8 priority sectors. So I would have mentioned earlier that when we started, we identified those sectors, and these sectors would be water, agriculture, fisheries, resilient ecosystems, and health. And the remaining ones, which will be completed under this project, are tourism, education, and infrastructure. Next, we have coastal zone climate risk mapping and modeling. And this is very important to provide that evidence basis that will be used to design adaptation solutions for maximum impact. So this one right now, as of to date, we have completed phase 1, where we were able to complete a data inventory report for this. And we will be moving into phase 2, where we do the climate modeling. Also for the SASAPs, I would like to mention that we just wrapped up our initial stakeholder engagements for education, and we have the first draft of the SASAP for education. And before that, we hosted a multi-sectoral NAP session with all sectors, just to provide a bit of a refresher for everyone. After this, we do have private sector engagement, where we'll be assessing their needs and developing an action plan for the private sector. And this would complement our existing private sector engagement strategy, which is part of our NAP process in St. Lucia. We will also be working on concept note development in St. Lucia under this project, where we aim to develop 1 full GCF concept note. And we also are going to be doing a needs-based assessment for loss and damage. Now, the TORs is in the works for this, so we don't have it completed as yet, but we aim to do that because, I mean, it is very critical in terms of our adaptation planning as well. And one key component that was identified is our communication when it comes to NAP. We want to ensure that everybody is on board and the messaging is communicated effectively and efficiently to all stakeholders involved, just to ensure that we have a very iterative approach as it comes to when it relates to the NAP. So for the recommendation and lessons learned so far, I apologize in advance for the noise because we are next to an airport. For the lessons and for recommendation so far, what we have found is that the lead up to missions, we need to focus a little more on having those one-on-one focus group meetings with the stakeholders, especially when it comes to developing concept notes and adaptation measures, because not all sectors are on the ground and are able to relate what they're feeling and the impacts to climate change. So having that, having them have those one-on-one sessions to understand the concepts more, they will be able to really refine and enhance their feedback when it comes to being able to develop those measures and develop those concept notes. So that is one of the recommendations I would make to any other country who would be taking on the development of this. Something that has worked really well too is approaching it at a multi-level. So for example, for the development of the SASAP for education, we have tertiary, secondary level, and you also engage them from a high level, so where you have your PSs and level of management, technical, your persons on the ground. So that level of engagement is important, and it really works because not only does it help in getting the buy-in, but you do have a stronger product and something that really reflects them adequately versus if they were disconnected from the process. So that is something that definitely works, the stakeholder engagement. And one of the things we do is that we involve the stakeholders when we are developing the GCF proposals, so that apart from them understanding their needs and ensuring it is captured, the climate rationale that you provide really reflects what is happening in their sector. So those were, to sum it up, those were some reflections, some points of reflections, and what can be taken as recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maya, and thanks so much for those recommendations on sector engagement and strengthening multi-level engagement. So we'll be able to hear a bit more from Maya in the Q&A section, but next we're really appreciative to have our colleague Alisher Mamantanov, who is a multi-level governance senior specialist from the Green Climate Fund, joining us despite the very late hour in South Korea. And so, Alisher, I'll pass to you next for your remarks. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Just double checking if you can hear me well.
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies that I cannot turn on my camera now. And I would like to thank very much NAP Global Network and for this report. I also actually was at the launch at COP29, speaking at the side event on this on the launch of the report, and also appreciate very much hearing experience from Santa Lucia of a NAP process, readiness process, and the support they have received. It's really important for us to hear also such experiences directly from countries, from our NGAs. I would like to thank once again for this report, and I found especially the key takeaways and recommendations very useful. And as was mentioned today, indeed our support for NAP formulation has now been provided to more than 100 countries. Actually, I have a bit more updated statistics now. 116 NAP proposals have been already approved, and the number of countries that are receiving this support is growing. However, we'd also like to provide some updates regarding the rollout of the new readiness strategy 24-27. And again, as was mentioned today, it includes now a provision for additional support for NAPs and for NAP implementation this time of $3 million. And the condition for these is for countries first to use their original $3 million for NAP formulation. So once they have used that, and also have used their 4 million that will be now available of new funding available for this 4 years. They would be able to access this funding on NAP implementation. So we hope, of course, it may be a small amount, but this is, of course, in addition to also all programming support that we provide. As you know, we provide a lot of support for adaptation, and GCF is committed to having balance between mitigation and adaptation actions. And so right now, 56% of our funding in grant pool in terms goes to adaptation. So in this, I think this can be seen as an additional vehicle to support NAP implementation. And we are now, as I mentioned, only now rolling out the new strategy. And we had already seminars, webinars for our NDAs explaining exactly how the new modalities work. As was mentioned today, also we hope that more of national and regional entities would be playing a role in the implementation. So indeed, just once again, reaffirming our continued support. And of course, we would like to see, of course, more and more countries submitting their NAPs to the NAP Central. We know that there are, of course, quite ambitious targets on this that were agreed in Dubai at COP28 with respect to, of course, all developed countries working to finalize their NAPs by 2025 and to advance in the implementation by 2030. So we have quite tough targets there to meet, and GCF is committed to continue to provide this support. Yes, I will stop here, and yeah, looking forward. Unfortunately, most probably I won't be able to take any questions, but we'll try to chat, at least in the chat, to respond as much as I can. Thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Alisher, and thank you again for joining despite the very late hour, and for sharing that really helpful information, especially on the extension of further support to countries, which we know is very much needed. So we'd now like to open up the conversation for questions from the audience. So please feel free to write your questions and comments in the chat box, and feel free to share them in Spanish, French, or English, and we will share them with the panelists. And so to open the question and answer session, we have our colleague Antwi joining us from Ghana. And so Antwi, I'll try to open the microphone. You may need to unmute, but much appreciated if you can share your intervention. And Antwi Boaziako Amoa is the Director in charge of Climate Vulnerability and Adaptation in Ghana. Antwi, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christian. Just want to be sure whether you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Wonderful. So it's in the afternoon here in Ghana. So good afternoon to everybody. Good evening, wherever you find yourself. First of all, just also add my voice to thank the presenters for those wonderful presentations that at least gives us a holistic picture about, especially for the first presentation, about the status of the NAPs as far as the GCF is concerned. And then also thanks to St. Lucia for giving us some information about sectoral adaptation plans, especially looking at the fishery sector. I am very happy to see some numbers in terms of how many countries are submitting, how many countries are in the processes, where are they coming from. I think these are very useful information that is good to be shared here. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend the side event at the COP because I was very busy. So I'm seeing these figures for the first time, unlike Alisher, who has been able to see this information previously. I like everything that has been discussed, but I have some concerns about one or two of the recommendations. Because if you look at the first presenter, if you look at the data that has been presented, it's an information that, as it is, countries were not given the opportunity to probably respond to any questions. It was just secondary data that's available at the GCF website that was analyzed. And so certain recommendations are not fit for purpose in this regard. And probably I would advise that you have a second look at them. One of them has to do with, and I'm saying this because of the global implications of such recommendations. So one was on the private sector engagement or private sector enhancement. From a research perspective, you make a recommendation based on gaps. And therefore, the GCF Readiness Facility itself, I'm a board member of the GCF anyway. The GCF Readiness Facility itself is a grant, and it's been given to countries to be able to advance their adaptation. Be able to start off. And so many countries are trying to probably structure the system in such a way that the priorities of the countries are advanced, one of which might not be private sector from the start. Private sector, in most of the cases, comes in when countries are advancing their processes. Of course, there are some countries that from the start added private sector in their proposals or in the implementation that they are doing at their own volition. And so making a recommendation of that nature, for me, it's a bit problematic, especially being a negotiator, and I know the implications of this recommendation in the negotiation process. And so I think that is one of the recommendations I see it as problematic. The second one has to do also similar to the private sector, has to do with domestic resources for the NAPs. If you know the history of NAPs, it's a top-down approach that is coming from the UNFCCC encouraging developing country parties to develop adaptation plans. And in doing so, you have bottom-up approaches to mainstream some of these issues into, so from the start, it's not about domestic financing mobilization. It's about using the readiness facility and other resources that are bilaterally provided, such as what the IISD is providing and some other support that comes in. So the emphasis here is not about domestic mobilization, but for probably when it comes to implementing them, which was not the focus of this assessment, then the issue of domestic mobilization comes in, because once you have been able to prioritize your issues and you want to implement, you have to go around and look at other resources to be able to implement them. So for the readiness, it is a bit premature to focus on domestic resource mobilization. I think that can also be problematic for negotiations and other issues. So those are the reflections that I have. Otherwise, everything that had been presented is very good for our records and also for our studies. Thank you so much, Christian, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Antwi, and really appreciate that that very thoughtful and considered feedback, which is helpful for us and comes from your experience with the GCF readiness and implementing it in Ghana. So again, really appreciate that. Maribel, would you like to respond, or Maya, would either of you like to respond to Antwi's sharing?
Yes, thank you, Christian. Thank you very much, Andrew, for your comments. Thank you very much. Yes, I see why you see this recommendation as, maybe problematic. But so these are sort of key takeaways, or you can see that as areas on which we thought that there could be an improvement if we wanted countries to go from the planning phase to the implementation phase. I totally agree with your comments about this is maybe a bit premature for this readiness, which is focused on planning, but the idea that we had in mind is how the GCF can support countries going from the planning phase to the implementation phase. But I hear your points, and yeah, but really look at this as maybe sort of key takeaways of the review and aspects that we think could be like strengthened if we want to support countries' transition towards implementation. But thank you very much. Thank you for your comments.
Excellent. So Geneva, over to you for the next question.
Yes, for sure. Although I see Antwi's hand is up, I don't know whether Antwi wants to very quickly respond.
Sure. Yes. So thank you, Maribel. I think perfectly so, like what you said. You know, communication is very important. If it is just takeaways, then there's no problem. But if there are recommendations, then it's problematic. But if it key takeaways, then I don't think there's any problem.
Yeah,
but once it's recommendations, yeah, if it's takeaways, then I totally agree with you. And well done for such a wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your question and intervention, Antwi. We have 2 questions in the chat. We'll first go with, what do you think should be the strategies to ensure meaningful participation of the private sector in national level GCF NAP readiness enhancing initiatives? So maybe Meyer, you can start us off, and then Maribel, you can add on.
Sure, no problem. And that's a great question. So for St. Lucia, when we think of private sector engagement, we are not thinking about these big companies with millions and billions to spend. We're looking at the micro entities, the entities where you have one person in a shop and she cannot leave because that's her livelihood, but she is being impacted. Okay, so our approach is meeting the private sector where they are, recognizing the role that they play in national development as well. And that is why it is not a cookie cutter approach for sure. And by no means, it takes a lot of work, and you do have to get creative with your approach. And that is one of the things that we found, even coming to sessions where we invite them to discuss matters of climate change. They would tell you that, I mean, they cannot spend no longer than 2 hours. They have to go. Then also too, now when you look at the bigger, more formal companies, they have a different work culture and where they can see climate fitting in. They look at things from a bottom line perspective. How does this drive revenue for me? And until they understand the impacts, so you see that you have to kind of target it at through different lens, and that is what we want to capture in our private sector engagement. So we are not necessarily trying to force their hand in terms of what can you commit towards this right now, but rather for them to recognize their role as a country. I mean, for St. Lucia, we're a small country. We're a tiny island. We have a population of 180,000. So we're looking at a little country. However, it doesn't change the fact that everybody is being impacted, and we cannot leave the private sector behind. And also too, we have heard the cries that private sector often feels disconnected from the work that government is doing. Sometimes they feel like, okay, government is doing this, but they're doing that. So at least if we bridge the gap for something that is affecting everybody, then that is where we see the importance and the connectivity of it. So when it comes to meaningful engagement, we definitely take the approach of getting creative and meeting the private sector where they are.
Thank you, Meyer. Maribel, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, thank you, Geneva. I think, Meyer, you pointed out, all the key aspects, or most of the key aspects for engaging the private sector. I would say that in what we see in our work is that communication is key, so that the private sector is aware of what is happening in terms of adaptation in their own country. And something that you mentioned, which is really, struck me, because it's we see that every time. So who is the private sector? Are you talking, is it commercial banks? Is it big corporates, or is it small and medium enterprises? So before willing to get the private sector involved, you need to know who is this private sector that you are willing to engage. So because they all have different needs, and you know, you have to talk to them in a different language. And something also I think it is important is to so information and also raise awareness about the risks, climate change risks, and also the opportunities of investing in resilience. I have been working in the past with commercial banks in some countries in Central America, like you know, Honduras, working with Mexico, in other countries, in Colombia, commercial and national development banks, and we see that there is an opportunity, you know, on investing in resilience for both the commercial banks or the financial institutions and the companies, whether they are big or small MSMEs. So awareness raising and also understanding the barriers. Is it that they perceive adaptation investment as being high risk investments, or with a low return on investment? They are not attractive investment. What is that? So building the case for investing in adaptation, I think, is also essential, and also trying to establish the frameworks for them to be engaged. In some countries, this could be like public-private partnerships, or also establish the risking mechanisms with blended finance. So there are a lot of ways, but I think that the first thing we need to do is, who is the private sector that we want to attract? What are their needs? What are their barriers? And then get them involved as soon as possible, so that they shape the agenda with the government and other key stakeholders. Thank you, Geneva.
Thanks, Maribel. And so before we move to the next question, our colleague Nega Miro has raised their hand to speak. And so Nega, are you able to unmute yourself, please? And did you want to respond to Myra and Maribel? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Christian. It's not only about the private sector, also the CSOs and NGOs as well. In many countries, CSOs and NGOs are not really considered development partners when it comes to climate action. Governments are normally trying to do everything about climate change, especially when it comes to climate finance. It's like CSOs and NGOs are sidelined. They are normally seen as if they are not development partners. So the government system normally is a bit of a pushy approach to keep CSOs and NGOs from the finance coming through the UNFCCC climate finance mechanism. So the funds like the GCF, Adaptation Fund, or even GEF needs to put in place strong policies that compels national governments to engage CSOs, NGOs, and also the private sector. I think you need to have some sort of a home tech message that can inform decision making at the fund levels, such as the GCF. So recently I did a climate finance landscape assessment, and what you normally see is that the national system is not, especially the government system is not cooperative, is not supportive of the NGOs and the CSOs so that they can engage in adaptation in climate finance mobilization. So they try to tell them to continue depending on bilateral source of funding, which is the traditional source of funding. So I think there should be this different UNFCCC climate finance mechanism should be advised to put in place strong policies that compels national governments engage CSOs and the private sector. Otherwise, governments cannot do everything about climate action. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So for our next question from Biraj, the question is how all of the knowledge and experience being generated by countries can inform UNFCCC processes. For example, the global goal on adaptation definition of indicators. How can this process be informed by countries' work on NAP monitoring and evaluation and learning systems? So Maya, I might put you on the spot for this one. I know that this is something you've worked on quite a bit. So how can St. Lucia's work on monitoring, evaluation, and learning for the NAP process? How can that inform processes like the Global Goal and Adaptation Indicator definition? Thanks.
No problem. So for St. Lucia, we in 2022 we completed our NAP progress report and used that opportunity to also do our adaptation communication at the same time to capture the progress on the NAP. And when we developed the NAP, we also developed an M&E framework. And this framework was done once again through a very consultative process where different sectors contributed to the development of the indicators so that when it came to reporting, it would make it easier so that we would not tell them, okay, I want to know X and Y. They actually informed on what they can report on. And then naturally after that, we were able to feed in, tie it to climate change. So what I can say, and for our second progress report and the GGA, in really refining your monitoring and evaluation, that can really assist and ensuring that the indicators actually align. So if in the negotiation space, for example, when you're looking at the indicators and the different language, once you're there, you're supposed to be able to see, like, does this reflect to what my country can report on and how how relevant it is. And I think just really tying it into not only climate change, but rather if there are any other conventions that we report on and the indicators are similar, to just establish that general alignment. And this all sits on the principle that the NAP process is supposed to be aligned with your national development planning as well. So that is the feedback I can give on that.
Thank you very much, Meyer. We have a final question in the chat from Ines. When things about moving from planning to implementation, it seems that it's important to engage the local level. Here we are about to submit a proposal to develop local plans as a starting point to implement climate action in municipalities. Are there any good practices that we could lead on? Did you take away any lessons during the analysis? Maribel, appreciate if you could quickly respond to that.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Geneva, and thank you, Ines, for your question. So yeah, I think that when we focus on locally led adaptation, the first thing I would say is to make sure that the capacities, skills, and financial resources, financial means are available to start working on adaptation at the national level, that data is available. So all this enabling environment is there from the beginning of the process, which I would say capacity, skills, and data are fundamental. And also something which is key, which is pivotal, especially when you work at when working at all levels, but is engaging key stakeholders, because as including CSOs, community representatives, because they are the ones that are suffering from the impacts of climate change, and they are the ones that have the knowledge to start looking at potential adaptation options that could be the most efficient ones at the local level. Then something that I would also recommend, having done a lot of climate risk vulnerability assessment and adaptation plans at the regional and local level, is that harmonization of approaches is key, so that you can then not only compare one community to the other, but also measure the progress and focus and tailor, give a harmonized approach, to give a flexibility but harmonized approach when working with the subnational levels. Yeah, so this would be my first recommendations, but I'm happy to if you want to discuss this further, Ines, I'm happy to set up a call and discuss about this.
With that, we'll be closing our webinar today. A big thanks to all of our panelists. We will be sharing the recording and the presentations with all of the participants, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. In the meantime, if you have any questions that we weren't able to cover today, please feel free, as Maribel said, to contact us at any time. You can address us at the email address for the NAP Global Network, which is on the screen and in the chat box. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.